past, Clinton County, Missouri was the western edge of the United States. Situated between two emerging cities, Kansas City and St. Joseph, Clinton County benefited from their growth. The Pony Express, the Gold Rush, and Western migration brought people through the county, but the population that settled here put it on the map. Plattsburg became the beef capital of the world. Lathrop was the major supplier of mules for the Boer Wars and World War I. 5 railroads crisscrossed the county, and the nation's first north-south highway ran through Cameron, Plattsburg, and Trimble on its way to Kansas City. Clinton County was home to David Rice Atchison, president for a day, James Harvey Birch, Missouri Supreme Court judge, Willis J. Wynn, president of the Cleveland Federal Reserve, and James Marshall, early leader of the Manhattan Project. Here are more family histories of Clinton County.
Hello, I'm Charnette Norton. My first name is Louise, which I don't use anymore. My parents did not realize that Dr. Spalding, who was there when I was born at home on the kitchen table, did not write the birth certificate out correct. So I go by Charnette rather than Louise, except when you go to medical procedures or in the military, but finally I convinced them to call me Charnette. I want to start my story and the history of our family with referring to the one that was done on Santa Claus Shaver, because my mother was in grade school and received a gift from Santa Claus Shaver. It's really appropriate in today's world because with the COVID-19, I can't get a manicure. So my mother has this manicure set that she really treasured that was a gift when she was in the 8th grade from Santa Claus Shaver. He did not always give toys, and I think when he did start to give toys, she was already out of grade school and was in high school, but she certainly treasured that. I have 4 branches of my family to talk about because I have 4 relatives that were original settlers in Plattsburg, Missouri and Clinton County. I'll start with the one that came the first in 1830, and that's John and Sarah Livingston. And that's the man that killed all the bears in Clinton County, and then also killed 23 in the courthouse. I believe there's a bear coat upstairs in the museum that is from some of the bears that he shot and killed. He settled north of Plattsburg, out near Log Church. He cleared timber from Log Church, which is right across from Hartell Lakes, up to Starfield, Missouri. He helped found the Log Church, and he was a member of the Disciples of Christ faith, and he was responsible for building the first church. The church that stands there today, which you can look at the picture, was built in 1842. It still stands. It's one of the oldest buildings in Clinton County. Next to it is Log Church School, and that's where I went to school for the first 2 years before I came to Plattsburg, to the old grade school that has since been torn down. And I think you marvel about the classes now that there are 25 or 20 in a class. There was 55 in my 3rd grade class with 1 teacher, and we all survived. And when those of us that graduated and went on to high school, I think there's only about 5 that did not go ahead and get at least a college degree, and many of us have masters. So whatever Mrs. Hessenflow did, she inspired that we needed to learn for the 4th grade. Then we were divided into 2 classes. Well, let me go on back to the Livingstons and how we're related. The quilt that I have on the table was made by John Livingston's daughter. I'm not sure how it came to me, but my mother had it. And there are, the Shavers are also related. John Livingston's daughter married Joe Crane, and they were the parents of my grandmother, Charlotte Crane, who then married Frank Ditmars. So that takes me then on over to the Ditmarses. Now there's stories, a lot of stories about the Ditmars. I have a picture here of their original house, and then the second house that was built, because the first house burnt in 1902, and they had to build another house. Now, James Ditmars came to Missouri, decided he needed to work and earn some money. So he was hired by Kit Carson to drive oxen to Santa Fe, New Mexico. He walked from Westport Landing to Santa Fe, New Mexico, not once but twice. He took the gold that he received and bought a farm from the railroad, which I own today. And that was quite a trip. Now in the picture of the farm, from the new farm, he also put up a barn. And that barn was a peg barn. And these are 2 pegs from that barn. The barn no longer stands because it finally rotted and fell down. But we did take some of the pegs out of it, and this is a couple of pegs because there were no nails at all in that barn because they didn't have nails at that time. Mr. Ditmars lost his first wife after 8 children. She died 5 months after the baby was born. There was a wagon train coming from Pennsylvania through Clinton County. They parked and had a campfire just south of his town. There was a young woman there, and he went down and asked her if she would come and take care of his children. But he said that wouldn't work unless he married her. Well, 9 months later, they had the first of 12 children. So my great-grandfather had 20 children. There were 17 girls and 3 boys, and 3 of the children lived past 100. My Aunt Cora lived to be 105. And her brother, the 2 oldest children also, Uncle Lee, lived to be over 100. And I can't remember which the other one was that lived to be 100. 17 of them became adults. There are 3 little girls that died with diphtheria. Now, James Ditmars raised mules, cattle, hemp, and children. The house had 2 bedrooms upstairs, and one was the boys and one for the girls. And you say, well, how come there were only 3 girls and 3 boys, and weren't they far apart? Well, yeah, but he had men that worked for him on the farm that helped him with the farming, and they stayed and lived with the family. I asked my great aunt Cora if it bothered her that she had a step grandmother, and she said, well, the only thing that really bothered her was that she sat on Papa's lap every night, and they didn't get to sit on his lap, and he brushed her hair. But she was a wonderful seamstress, and they were the best dressed, as you can see in some of the pictures that you're looking at, that she really was an outstanding seamstress, and they really enjoyed having the clothes that she made for them, and it really was not a problem. My grandfather and his 2 younger sisters inherited the farm place because the other children had been given a dowry when they married, and so he bought from his 3 younger sisters their part of the farm so he could own the farm by himself. He was born there, my mother was born there, and then I own that house now that needs lots of work like all old houses do. He was a big marijuana farmer, or hemp, because he sold it to the English for the Boer War. He drove mules and horses to Lathrop, to Guynton, Harrington, to the sale barns there, and he had lots of stories about going there. When the children had diphtheria, he walked to Richmond to get medicine for them because they didn't have the medicine in Plattsburg. So he was quite a hardy old man. Okay. Another one of my relatives was Asa Norton, and he was sold by his family when he was 9 years old in Scotland and sold to a pig farmer in Indiana. And he said until he was 18, he never lived in a house. They just put him in the barn. And he really wasn't treated very well, and so he certainly was against slavery. He served in the Civil War with the Indiana Infantry, and this is the badge that he wore in his uniform. Now, when his wife came to Missouri, she had a trunk, and Mother went through the trunk and found out that she had this newspaper that's from the 1800s. It is a reprint, but it's from the 1800s, and it tells of George Washington's death. And it's on both sides, and it's very interesting reading because it talks about some things that we don't really like in our history, which is about the selling of humans, and it talks about the slave auction and what was available. And I don't know whether people know, because it's not written down. My mother always said that Plattsburg was a slave auction of Northwest Missouri, because we did have families here that unfortunately did own slaves, and many of their descendants are still here, which is unfortunate. It is very unfortunate. Because the Norton and the Cranes were neighbors, they would have events, and there are different things that are events. We certainly didn't have the things that we have today with television. And so Asa Norton was injured in the Civil War and became an epileptic. So he spent a lot of time going to the old soldiers' reunions, and he went to one in Sacramento. And when he came back, he shipped a barrel of china to his wife. And so it was a major event in the community to go unpack Ms. Norton's china. And my grandmother Ditmars, when she was a Crane, remembered going to the Norton household and watching them unpack the dishes. And he had sent back a set of Havlin to his wife. and it's a brown cornflower pattern, which is extremely rare. It is either blue or pink, and we have no idea how he picked out these brown dishes. But this is what he brought back to his wife as something that he treated her coming home things from the war. So she was very pleased to have a gift. And then later on, the Cranes and the Nortons were good friends, and Joe Crane decided he was ready to retire, and he was going to move to town. He'd lost his wife, his children were grown, and so he sold the farm in 1858 to Asa Norton. And Joe Crane came to town. He did not work. He made enough money with his farming business, so he went to the bank every day and sat on the curb and talked to all the other old men that were sitting on the bank, and he always said about noon, well, it's time to go home and eat lunch, and play with Miss Alice, who was his second wife. And those were the funny stories, and he lived to be past 100. So he spent over half of his life retired. At least he knew how to retire that some people in the family don't know. Okay, Clinton County has lots of country churches, and I grew up in one, and that's the Church of the Brethren, which is torn down in 1980, but it was organized in 1866. The Nortons were part of that because they belonged to the Church of the Brethren. My mother's side of the family were Disciples of Christ and helped start the Christian church in Plattsburg and then Log Church. But on the Norton side, their church of choice was the Church of the Brethren that was built and started in 1866. So they were actively involved in that. We do have farmland, and there's Indians in this area, and our family has collected relics of the Indians. This is one of the things we found on some of the farms. My father, when he and my mother got married, did not have any money. His parents had lost their farms during the Depression, and I can guarantee you the Ditmars and all of her aunts and uncles were very unhappy that they got married because they didn't think my father would ever be able to make a living for my mother. My mother taught school making $90 a month at Hazel Dell, and this is the bell that she used to call her students in. One of her students, she was 17 when she started teaching, and she had one student that was 18 that hadn't got out of grade school yet. And the 18-year-old could date, and my mother could not date, and she was very unhappy that she had a student that could date. And my mother, who was out of high school, her father would not let her date my father yet, which was interesting. So when they did get married, Dad needed to make a living, so he sheared sheep, and he trapped, and he would sell them for a nickel and a dime, the skins. There was a lot of mink, raccoons, beavers in the area, and in all of his walks and things, he found this collection of arrowheads because there had been Indians in the area, and he found all of those that he worked with. My parents started out very, very poor. They had nothing. I remembered when they said they bought their first 44 acres, and I found where they borrowed $100 to buy a cow because that's all they could have. My father worked very hard, and when he died, he owned 1,800 acres because he thought it was really important to invest in the land. And the reason he had it, he would have given it all away, but my mother was extremely tight, and she saved every penny and every nickel they had. And one of the lawyers said my mother could make the buffalo scream because she squeezed those nickels so tight. I grew up thinking we were extremely poor because Mother's mantra was, well, we don't have any money, we don't have any money, we don't have any money, because they were buying land. And I remember when they bought the first farm, it was 100 acres. And then this next farm they bought after that was really difficult because for us as children, because the Dad planted corn, it was full of concoburrs. And Wesley and I had to hold the rows of corn to get the concoburrs out of the field. Free, we did not get paid, we got to eat, and that's what was important. And that was, we grew up making, helping with the farming. I remember in the wintertime when Dad picked corn with a team of horses, and he brought the corn into the house, and at night we shelled the corn because we didn't have the corn pickers that we have today in the big machines. And it was after we did our lessons that we worked until we got ready to go to bed. It was not an easy life, but it was a good life. It was not bad at all. I mentioned Log Church. I went to country school there. The first 2 years, we had 10 cups that we drank out of. And we also had 10 spoons that we ate our lunch with. Now we just rinsed them off with cold water, and of course you wouldn't do that today. And everyone in the first or second grade that went to Log Church had mumps, measles, chicken pox, every one of us. And the reason was they had buried the children that had died earlier in the cemetery at Log Church, and the bacteria seeped into the wells. And you could always count on first graders to be sick. And even though we had the shots, we weren't that sick. But you'd have mumps, measles, and chicken pox. And it was just a known thing that would occur to you. And of course, we didn't really sanitize our cups very well either with that. Now, I mentioned that my dad bought some farms. One of them he bought, and the place where I live, we have the Jefferson Highway that runs in front of my house. Of course, it comes from Winnipeg down to New Orleans, and this is a sign he found when he was mowing the road bank, and it's, I understand, a unique sign because it isn't original, and it's supposedly in very good condition. The rest of them are pretty bent out because they used them to patch holes in barns and things like that. But Dad found it, and Mother brought it and nailed it up to the wall in the, on the porch in the barn, and so I have it now because my brothers say, "Ooh, who wants that old piece of metal?" So I have it. I have no idea whether anybody's going to want it when I'm dead and gone or not, or maybe they'll give it to the museum. Okay, but this is the sign. Now, Plattsburg had a bank. It was First National, and one of the things they did was to get people to save after the Depression. And they gave banks to children and then to adults. This is my Uncle Ralph. This is my father's brother that was killed when he was 18 on a motorcycle. This is my father's bank, and this is my mother's bank. And they've kept them. And then they had banks for children. This was in the Norton family, and this one was in the Ditmars family. So they did have banks. There's coins in there, but I have no idea how you would open them up and ever get the coins out of there. But they did have banks, and First National Bank, which is where Larry Fisher's offices have been, was at that time. Plattsburg had a unique history. Jesse James, of course, was at Kearney, and he came through and robbed the bank at Plattsburg one time, and then they reenacted the movie and had it. Now, when he left Plattsburg after he'd robbed the bank, he was driving north where the Cranes lived, and my grandmother and her sister were walking to school, and these men came by on horses and asked them if they'd like a ride to school. So they got on the horses with the men, and they took them to school, and when they got off, they handed each of them a gold piece. Now, there's no one but the James brothers would have had a gold piece at that time, and they had taken them from probably from some of their robberies, or perhaps even the bank in Plattsburg. Plattsburg has had a colorful history with our black community and our white community. We integrated in 1954. My father was on the school board, and he came home after the board meeting and said at breakfast to my mother and my brothers and I, "Do you know that all the black parents came to school and they don't want to go to school with you?" Well, I didn't understand that. I'd gone to country school and I went to town school, and I didn't think there'd be anything about it. But the black parents came to the school board and requested that they keep their grade school. They had 3 things they asked. Number 1, they asked for the commodity foods that were given to the schools because they did not receive them, and the parents would cook the commodity foods for them. They asked for the same textbooks, and the board was not aware that the black school did not have the same textbooks that the white schools did. And then they asked that the furnace be fixed. And those were 3 things. And they kept their separate school until their teachers were ready to retire, because they were sure that the school board would not accept having the black teachers teach, and they did not want them to lose their jobs. Now, the first year we integrated the high school, we went to Platte City to play football. My brother was on the football team. He was always doing things in a rush. And they dressed in a classroom. They didn't have locker rooms. He opened the door with Walter Harris behind him and faced a mob. People he knew had clubs and pitchforks standing outside the classroom and asked him to step aside and use racial slurs because they wanted to get to Walter. Luckily, there was a father had stayed in with the team, and when Wesley turned around and shoved Walter back in, he said, "Coach, we've got a serious problem out here." The father said, "I'll take care of it." The father left the room, went to the filling station, and that's when we had dial-up phones on a party line. He asked to use the phone, and he was smart enough to call the operator in Jefferson City, Missouri, and ask that for the number of the Highway Patrol, and he told the Highway Patrol what was going on. They told him not to go back to the school, and they brought all the Highway Patrolmen in Northwest Missouri into the school into Platt City and loaded up the children on the bus. And I remember waiting and Mother and Dad saying, "Wonder where the bus is, it's really taken a long time." And they were escorted into the parking lot at the high school. But the Highway Patrol and all the football players got off in their uniforms. They were not allowed to undress. And for a long time, the Highway Patrol stayed in the black area of Plattsburg to make sure. And I think that probably did something to change how we were, because many of those children's parents worked for Jacksons and Newbies and Kincaids, the big cattle farmers, which Clinton County is known for, and others in the community, and no one wanted their children hurt because they knew that their employees would not be able to handle that. And the kids were upset that that would happen to their classmates. So that's part of the things that made Plattsburg different what it is. And since I've had the opportunity to live many places in this country, there's no place like Plattsburg, and no one has the mix that we do of biracial children and couples and things, because really it's not an issue. And after that it became not an issue. It was not a problem to have the school dances, to go on school trips with each other. We tried to make things not have anybody excluded. Yes, there still is some problems, and there will always be some problems. And we still go to some of the neighboring schools, and some of our black athletes and their families are called derogatory names. Hopefully that will eventually all go away. But we have had a colorful history and some things that have happened in this town to improve race relations, certainly since we started with some plantations around. And most of our blacks are descendants of some of the slaves that worked on those plantations. One part of the family I didn't talk about were the Transues, and the reason I didn't, and that was my grandmother Norton was a Transue, was that Melissa Stutzman has talked, and I don't want to step on anything that she says, but that was the fourth member that was the original 300 that came to Plattsburg that I'm a descendant of. My mother was always very proud that we had 4 relatives that settled in Plattsburg. I mentioned earlier that I was born at home. Dr. Spaulding was there but was asleep, so my father delivered me on the kitchen table. It was a one-room house, one bedroom house, and then Mother and Dad slept in the living room. My 2 brothers got the bedroom, and I got the hallway. And then they decided they probably need to build a new home. Now, we were pretty modern. We had electricity and we had cold running water, but no hot water, and the toilet was out back, so we didn't have all the modern things. So they built a new home in 1955. It was completed in 56, and it was great because we had central air conditioning, which was that was better than having the inside bathroom as far as we were concerned in the summertime. Okay, there was only the house there, and then the Dad and Mother grew the buildings and added others as they expanded their farming operation. And this is a picture that was taken several years ago. We've added 2 other buildings since then. Wesley and David were partners with my father for a long time. My father passed, and then Wesley ended up with dementia, and so David's son Eric now farms with them, and they've expanded to be a certified free-range hog operation, and also have a beef and cow that has cow and calf herd. So as well as corn and soybeans and hay, and employ I think 8 people in the Plattsburg area. It went from a very small farm to this larger farming operation. I've been asked to talk about my military service. I guess it's rather unique for a woman to wait till she's 39 years old to join the Army. I did a project for the National Academy of Sciences that was funded by the Pentagon, and the chief dietitian of the Army said she wanted me, and I laughed at her because I was in my late 30s. I knew that you could only be 35 until you joined the Army. Also, you had to be a clinical dietitian, and I hate being a clinical dietitian. I only like to be management. I like food, and I like to be the boss. But she insisted that I go ahead and fill out the paperwork. I filled out the paperwork. They came to my office over in Kansas City, Kansas, swore me in. I went to the drill the first weekend, and I got asked who I knew, because they said, you don't meet the qualifications to be a dietitian in the Army. You know, you're 39 years old. How on earth did you get in? I didn't tell them for a long time that the person that had signed the waiver to get me in and brought me in as a captain and a year and 8 months later I was a major, was the chief dietitian in the Army. They asked me to find a speaker, and so I called her up and asked her if she would come speak at our medical conference. And my secretary just loved to come out and announce in the kitchen, "The Pentagon is on the phone, Miss Norton." They were all really impressed. I mean, to me, she was just Jessie Brewer. She wasn't Colonel Brewer. Our commander at the hospital in Kansas City, in the reserve unit, was a little upset that I contacted the Pentagon directly. It did go through the right channels. Well, I had her phone number. I had her personal number. It wasn't a problem for me to call. I just went ahead and did what I thought I needed to do. So I was very fortunate to have a unique career because I started at such a high rank, which usually you start out as lieutenants and you're a captain for at least 7 years, and mine only lasted a year and 8 months. I did make full bird colonel in less than 10 years and got to be at a medical brigade for a long time. When I turned 60, I thought, well, it's time to retire. So I was ready to retire, and they said, no, we'd like for you to stay a little longer. We'd like to send you to Bosnia. So at 60 years of age, I went off to war to Bosnia and celebrated my 61st birthday wearing combat boots and carrying a 9mm and serving our country in a war zone. And I thought it was just like another vacation. I had owned my own company and I traveled all the time, and it really wasn't a problem to be away from home. Yeah, I got shot at, in a war zone, and somebody tried to kidnap me one time. That's just part of going to war. But I just looked at that as some new life experiences. One of the most unique experiences I had in the military was I belonged to a professional organization called the Society of Food Service Management. And that's all the people that supplied the food service to corporate America. And we also were affiliated with the European Catering Association, and we went over there for a year. The person that planned the conference one year was when we were going to Great Britain. Her mother had been killed during the war, and it was the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And they all knew that I was in the Army, and she said, "I want you to come. But you do not put on your Army uniform and go to a foreign country without approval." She said, "How do I get you?" And flippantly I said to her, "Well, just write the Army." She wrote the Department of Army, and the letter came down through my unit. And one day in formation on the weekend, my general said, "Norton, I'll see you after formation." And I went in the office and he threw this letter at me and he said, "What is this?" And it was the okay approval from everybody in the Army through the reserve to our higher headquarters and to him. He said, "I don't have any money to send you to Great Britain." And I said, "Well, I'm going anyway, but I have to go. And I can't go wear my uniform, and they want me to wear my uniform." So I was really fortunate. We had a formal dinner at the House of Lords. And this is the picture that I had taken between the two little beef eaters. And it was really fun. Now, I took over because there was also a student contest, memorabilia and things that we have, unit crests and things like that, to give all the students that competed. Well, when I came home, I had nothing left on my uniform because I found out then what the American soldier means to the people in Europe and where we saved them in World War II. And these people are heads and owners of people like Compass and Sodexo. And they were so impressed that I would serve my country and come over there and got to represent them. It was really quite an honor to represent the entire Army for that celebration for the 50th anniversary. So I've had some other fun things too, but being in the Army, being older, certainly is a unique experience and it's a lot of fun. I don't think I could have done it when I was younger because I'm too independent, and I got to be in a position where I could write the rules and I didn't have to follow them, which is not what always happens in the Army. And I have written a couple of manuals for the Army because they didn't have them. And I was in a position where I could do that. And they still use them today, and I've been retired for a number of years. It was an honor to serve my country.